Is the probability going up that we're going to do a larger X, maybe 4X or 5 or?
Yeah, I think it is. Now, diminishing returns in Bitcoin is a thing. 2013 cycle, which is in green, has obviously a lot higher returns than the yellow cycle and then the orange cycle. So you can see the diminishing returns there very well displayed. If we continue that path of diminishing returns, we would not be able to reach the 200K mark. Because if you think of the 2013 cycle, there we actually did a 90X or so since the previous all-time high. And for the 2017 cycle, that was a 20X. We went from 1200 to 20K. And then we went in the 2020 cycle, we went from 20K to 69K or so. So that's a 3.6X or so. And if we would keep on, again, having diminishing returns, we would only see a 1 point something X at most, which to me doesn't seem that logical, especially given the ETF flows that are currently happening. So we actually have proof that the demand is here, but also due to another reason, which is maybe a bit of a more complex topic, but that is, I believe, at least since the third halving, we've passed an inflection point where Bitcoin's scarcity is increasing.
Is the probability going up that we're going to do a larger X, maybe 4X or 5 or?
Yeah, I think it is. Bitcoin's scarcity is increasing, and my opinion is that in the third halving we passed an inflection point where that scarcity is increasing. And so to me it's logical that we will have a better performance again rather than a worse performance than the previous cycle. Although I don't think the difference, I prefer to remain conservative in those estimates. That's why I go with the target range of 200K or so, which would kind of imply that we don't see diminishing returns, but also not immediately massive improvements over the past cycle, because there's still the diminishing effect with just the fact that we have a growing market cap and there's more participants in the market. The natural flow of Bitcoin. So you can see if you plot a lock growth curve and on the lock price chart of Bitcoin, it has a very good fit. And another fit would be a power law, which is also diminishing returns, a bit more optimistic. Naturally, you can see in price that we have these diminishing returns. It will remain a force as part of just the growing market cap. But what is not calculated in the lock growth curve and in a power law, in my opinion, is that there is an increase in scarcity in Bitcoin, which we can kind of measure on chain. And so I think the scarcity increase in Bitcoin will put an upward pressure on price. Therefore, it will be more likely to have increased returns compared to just the natural log growth curve. The question remains, how big is that force? Maybe that force is very small and we will just see similar results to the log growth curve, but maybe that force is very big. And actually, I assume that is bigger than most people think, because the ETF inflows are currently 4,000 Bitcoin per day. That's of a similar magnitude to the first halving. And so if you think that Bitcoin now saw a first halving and we have this gigantic price increase within 2 months, we make an all-time high because of it, it kind of shows that there is scarcity within Bitcoin, even though there will always be sellers at certain prices. So there's no such thing as a supply shortage. Price will just move up until there is an next seller. But the more pressure gets put, the higher those prices will increase. So I added here the halvings in the chart as well. It gets a little busy, but just in each color for each cycle, now that vertical line has been added. That is the specific halving to that cycle. Those halvings all vary a little bit in duration, and that is halving has a different type of shock to the market, and it depends on many factors, macro circumstances and so forth. So you get these slight variations. We can see also that the ETF approval here and the first halving are very close to each other. So I just said, like, the ETF approval is of a similar magnitude to the first halving, and we can also actually see that visually in the chart. The vertical line of the first halving and the ETF, they are very close to each other. So that is very interesting. Now, another interesting thing is that if you think of the previous all-time high, the 3-month period that I marked here in the blue area, that we would potentially double in price, we still have another catalyst that is coming. That is the next halving. So if you think of diminishing returns or increased returns, it puts, again, more pressure on price. So assuming that the halving is going to happen within the next 3 months, in April 20th or so. So that is another catalyst for reaching potentially increased returns, or at least cross that doubling in price. Now, the final thing that I want to mention here as well from this chart is the cycles here are actually aligned by or scaled by realized price. The realized price is the average purchase price of all Bitcoin. So it's actually the capital flow into Bitcoin, the real money that gets paid, so So we look at each transaction on chain and we measure how much capital inflow there is. And so we measure what is the average purchase price for all of those transactions. And so that is what gives us the realized price. Now, the realized price is a very good way of aligning cycles, in my opinion, or scaling cycles, because it's a lot less volatile than price. It moves more gradually, as you can see by these dotted lines, which also have each cycle color, or each dotted line is colored for a specific cycle. And the interesting thing is that we can look again also at the change in that realized price. So the growth of that, the trajectory basically of that realized price. If that realized price is moving up fast, that actually means there's a lot of capital inflow into Bitcoin. And so if we look at the measurement from the previous all-time high, that trajectory starts to move up at least faster than the yellow cycle and the orange cycle. It's actually more comparing to the green cycle, which is the first halving. And so assuming that, or at least thinking that it's a valid measurement, we might also move up faster in price than the yellow and the orange cycle. Considering the consistent flows of the ETFs, I give a high probability that this will happen. Illiquid supply is a measurement of HODL behavior, long-term holder supply, which is one way of looking at HODL behavior. Another one is illiquid supply, that they kind of have similar measurements. So if we look at that, we can actually see that the supply issuance, which we mentioned already a few times, we added 18 million coins up until the third halving. So that was a very high supply issuance. You can see the numbers here, 7,350 a day before halving one, and then we get 3,975 after the first halving with every halving. But what we can see is that the third halving serves as an inflection point where suddenly an illiquid supply starts outpacing new supply issuance. And to me, this signifies that Bitcoin is, instead of becoming more abundant, which it has been up until the third halving, that we're actually becoming more scarce again into the future. And to me, that logically makes sense. The supply issuance halves, and there's more people that are using Bitcoin as a store of value. And we can actually also see that it's happening in the data. So for me, that's a reason to assume that that's what I meant with the upwards pressure that it's putting on these diminishing returns. So we already saw the consistent demand for ETFs an increase actually compared to the previous halving in scarcity. So to me, that both implies that these targets which we discussed are fair to reach.